Hello. This morning, we revealed that the investigation into Diane Abbott's comments on racism finished 5 months ago. 12 hours after our story dropped, the Labour leadership have lifted her suspension. But is she banned from standing as a Labour candidate in this election? Plus, the Conservatives say if they win the election, they will protect pensioners from their own future tax rises. But are they neglecting young voters? Hi, welcome to Election Newsnight. We are live each weeknight at 10:30 on BBC Two and BBC News and iPlayer with interviews and insight. With me throughout the programme this evening, Labour MP Dawn Butler and former Conservative Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng, who, like around 76 of his Tory colleagues, is standing down. First, let's bring you up to date with today's election stories, starting with our exclusive that we broke this morning, that the Labour investigation into Diane Abbott over her comments on racism was finished 5 months ago. And tonight, the Labour leadership have lifted their suspension of her and restored the whip. Nick is here. Bring our viewers up to date.
Well, Vic, as you were saying earlier this evening, Sir Alan Campbell, who is the opposition chief whip, wrote to Diane Abbott saying that the Labour whip had been restored to her. And what that means is that this allows Britain's first black woman MP to end this Parliament as a Labour MP, nearly 40 years after her election for Labour. And the big question, as you're saying, Vic, now is, will Diane Abbott contest this general election?
It is a very good question. And what you're referring to is that there is an email from Sir Alan Campbell to Diane Abbott, which I have seen a screenshot of. And in it, he suggests to her that she has indicated an intention to retire at this election. As I understand it, Miss Abbott has never made that commitment to the party.
And in a sense, that takes us to the heart of where we are now. So there is a belief amongst some of Diane Abbott's supporters in the campaign group. That's the former Jeremy Corbyn group on the left of the party, still very much alive, but obviously Jeremy Corbyn is not a Labour MP. View amongst some in that group that Diane Abbott will not be standing in this general election. Diane Abbott has not told them that. That is just what they believe, the direction that we're heading in. But there is an even stronger view amongst supporters of Keir Starmer that Diane Abbott must not stand in this election. So what the Keir Starmer group are saying, allies close to the leader of the Labour Party, is they want dignity for Diane Abbott. One of his allies described her to me as an icon of the Labour movement. But they equally say that Diane Abbott cannot stay because she is, in their view, a reminder of the Jeremy Corbyn era, which they say was an era of failure. And one ally told me that on the doorstep, that incident where Diane Abbott, when she was Shadow Home Secretary in a general election campaign, struggling to sort of explain the numbers behind a policy, they say that comes up on the doorstep and that is damaging. And there may well be enough in that panel report, the report of that NEC, National Executive Committee, the Labour Party, that panel report that you reported on, that would stop Diane Abbott from standing. So that panel issued a formal, as you say, warning after saying that Diane Abbott had, and this is the wording, had engaged in conduct that was, in the opinion of the NEC, prejudicial and grossly detrimental to the Labour Party. Now, under the law, a political party is allowed to say, we believe this person would not be in our political interest to have them as a candidate. That is how they blocked Jeremy Corbyn. So, look, Vic, that was your story. You reported it, came out early this morning. Then things moved really quickly this evening.
Yeah, and I think the significant thing from this morning was the Labour's National Executive Committee. We were able to reveal that it completed its investigation into Diane Abbott last December. Remember, she'd written a letter to The Observer in April 2023, suggesting that Jewish, Irish and traveller people did experience prejudice, but they were not subject to racism all their lives. So the NEC investigated, they issued her a formal warning, they required her to complete an online e-module, which I'm told was an online anti-Semitism awareness course. Diane Abbott did that in February. And since then, this matter has been in the hands of Labour's chief whip, Sir Alan Campbell.
That's right. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because as you reported this morning, we had the panel reaching its conclusion in December. Then in February, Diane Abbott completes this online course. And as you're saying, Vic, at that point, it passes to the Chief Whip, Sir Alan Campbell. What is the primary job of the Chief Whip? Well, it's not a great secret in Westminster. I think our colleagues can confirm that. The role of a Chief Whip is to enforce the will and the authority of the leader of their party. And yet, as recently as Friday, Keir Starmer told the BBC that Diane Abbott is, and this is what he said, is going through and being part of and getting to the end of a disciplinary process because of something she has said. Part of a disciplinary process. When it was with the panel, yes, it was arm's length. Since February, it's been with a member of his shadow cabinet. Now, that has been seized on by the Tories. So tonight, the chairman of the Conservative Party, Richard Holden, said Sir Keir Starmer has blatantly lied to the British people and has serious questions to answer. And I do have to say that Diane Abbott's allies are furious. One told me that the Labour leadership has behaved in a shameful manner towards her. They're talking about a lack of respect to a very significant figure. But interestingly, members of the campaign group, very nervous about speaking out. They're worried that if they do that, they'll find that they're not Labour candidates at the general election.
Well, let's bring in Labour MP Dawn Butler, who is a friend of Diane Abbott's. Kwasi Kwarteng is with us as well, former Conservative Chancellor. Dawn Butler, your reaction?
Well, I think there's a lot to unpack in all of that. I think fundamentally, Diane was the first elected black female MP in our country, and that is something to be proud of. And when I entered Parliament in 2005, there were just two of us, just me and Diane. They couldn't tell us apart, but that's just another matter, but there were just two of us. And I think it's important that the whip was returned to Diane. She went through the process. I think it was really important the whip was returned to her. And I think fundamentally in all that you've been speaking about today, and Keir said this in his last speech to the Parliamentary Labour Party, is that we are a team. And I think the Labour Party has to act as a team. And I do feel that there are some people around Keir, not Keir himself, that maybe have watched a little bit too much Scandal or you know what I mean, the West Wing, and think that's how politics is done. That isn't how politics is done. And it is important that somebody like Diane, you know, gets her due respect.
Do you think she has been given due respect?
Well, obviously, it's great that you broke the story today and kind of unpicked what was happening. But I think it's important that we end the day the right way, that Diane has had the whip restored. And the other thing is that it's up to Diane to decide what she wants to do next, and I'm sure she will.
But that's the interesting bit, isn't it? Because it's all very well to give the whip back to her, but the question still remains whether she's going to be a candidate or not. And only time will tell. I suppose we'll know when the nominations have to be handed in.
But it's whether it should be her decision.
Absolutely.
Or the leadership's decision.
That's right. But then there are ways the leadership can lean on people. And we don't know, there might have been deals done. She might have been told you can get the whip back on condition that you don't stand again. We don't know the full story. And actually, you know, when I look back last week, there were two Conservative MPs, one of them was Matt Hancock, I think the other was Bob Stewart, who were given the whip back. But it was clear they'd said to everybody that they weren't standing again. So it was a kind of formal recognition of the fact that they would leave Parliament as Conservative MPs. But we still don't know whether Diane will be a candidate or not.
I mean, there's a bit of a delicate dance going on, which is the whip has been restored to Diane Abbott. And I think the hope in the leadership is that would allow Diane Abbott, after nearly 40 years, to leave Parliament with dignity. But I think that Diane Abbott very much wants to have that dignity. And I think the view amongst many of her allies is that it's a bit late in the day for the Labour Party suddenly to sort of hand her dignity. And so she doesn't want to be seen to being forced, and reports this evening, Diane Abbott to be blocked.
Yes.
She probably would be if she tried
but
to
what do
become
we
a Labour
think?
candidate.
Do you think she'll stand again? I mean, what's your sense?
Well, it would be wrong of me to pretend that I know exactly what is going to happen. But my instinct is, from talking to allies of Diane Abbott, is that she won't stand again, but she doesn't want to look like her hand has been forced. Yeah. It's all about dignity.
I have seen a screenshot of an email that was sent from Labour's Chief Whip to Diane Abbott, in which he suggests that she has indicated that she is going to retire. Yes. My understanding is she's never indicated that to Labour leadership. Kwasi Kwarteng, let me ask you. I mean, Dawn mentioned that Diane Abbott was the first black woman to be elected to Westminster. And you remember that?
I remember the 1987 election. Didn't really understand that much about politics then. And I remember very vividly seeing 4 MPs who were ethnic minority MPs. And it was the first time, certainly in the 20th century, that had happened. There were other ethnic MPs in earlier decades. But it was the first time, certainly since the war, that we saw ethnic minority MPs being returned to Westminster. So whatever, and I didn't really have...
And you were what age?
12.
Right.
And I'm 49 now.
Was it a big deal?
Yeah, it was. I remember watching it and thinking, that's a step forward. That's something that is new and good. And I remember Paul Boateng, I think Keith Vaz, Diane Abbott, and Bernie Grant, who sadly has passed away, being introduced effectively into Westminster. They'd won their elections. They were on the hustings. They were being returned. And that was definitely a moment in post-war history.
More from you in a moment. Thank you. In the meantime, for all the election content, BBC iPlayer has launched a live stream with the latest from Vote 2024, and you can also watch the best Newsnight interviews on our YouTube channel. Let's talk now to James Murray, who has been put up by Labour this evening. Thank you very much for being with us. Now, the Tories tonight are calling Sir Keir Starmer a liar over this Diane Abbott latest news. Is he?
No, look, I think there's been a process which has been gone through here about Diane and what she wrote in that letter last year. And I think, what she wrote in the letter was wrong, and it was right. There was an investigation into it. I think I'm really glad that the process has now come to a conclusion, and she's now got the whip back, because I think none of us wanted to be in this situation.
Sir Keir Starmer told the BBC on Friday, Diane Abbott is going through and being part of and getting to the end of a disciplinary process. That process has been in the hands of the Chief Whip since February, March. Who does the Chief Whip report to?
Well, the Chief Whip obviously works with the leader of the Labour Party, but it's not a process that I have any inside knowledge on. And,
No.
I think it's really... But
you must have asked the question before you came on Newsnight tonight.
Yes, but I don't know the answer to it, because I don't have any insight into that process.
Did you not say, what's our line? What are we saying tonight?
Well, I obviously spoke to the press office about me coming on to the show tonight.
What did they tell you to say?
They didn't. They told me what we know has happened, which is that the whip has been restored. But this process is not one which is discussed within the Labour Party, because it is at arm's length. It is something that MPs like myself have no connection with and no involvement in,
But it's
and
not
no
at
inside
arm's
knowledge
length from
on.
the leadership, and hasn't been since February, when Diane Abbott completed her anti-Semitism course. It's been in the hands of the Chief Whip, who reports to Sir Keir Starmer. Sir Keir Starmer has complete authority over the Chief Whip. If Diane Abbott wants to stand at this election, will she be able to?
Well, as you say, it's a decision for Diane whether she wants to stand, and then there's a process which goes through.
It's her decision.
Well, as all of us as MPs, the process of deciding whether you end up being a candidate, obviously you personally have to decide if you want to stand, and then there's a party process about whether you get the party nomination, and that's what's going to happen, I guess, over the next week, now that the decision about the whip...
Because candidates in Hackney, North and Stoke Newington have adopted her.
Well, no, I'm saying that there's a process. I mean, it works differently because an election has just been called now, and so obviously candidates have to get in place very quickly.
Sure.
These things usually speed up when an election is called in the way that it has been just now. But there is a process now that the whip has been restored to Diane, and as I say, I'm glad that process has come to a conclusion. There's now the process of working out if she's restanding and who the candidate is in that constituency.
Do you think she should be able to stand if she wants to?
Well, that's a process which the party will go
but
through.
What do you think?
Well, it's not for me to say. It's a process of the
you
party.
must have an opinion.
Well, I don't think it's right for me to involve myself in that. That's a
I'm not
decision
asking you
for the
to
party.
involve yourself. I'm just asking you, as a member of the shadow front bench squad, what your opinion is. Do you think Diane Abbott, now the whip has been restored, she should be able to make a decision about whether she stands or not?
Well, she will make a decision, and then the party will make a decision about whether she gets the party endorsement.
OK, so it's not really her decision then?
Well, it's two parts, isn't it? Because, if I want to stand for election, I have to decide I want to be a candidate, and then I have to get adopted by the party. That's the same for all candidates and all people who want to become MPs.
What's the difference between Diane Abbott and Steve Reed, who apologised unreservedly after calling a Jewish Conservative donor a puppet master in 2020? He wasn't suspended or investigated, and a spokesman for Sir Keir Starmer at the time said Steve deleted the tweet and did not mean to cause any offence.
Look, it's absolutely not for me as an MP to start passing judgment about different MPs and what they've said. There is a process.
Sorry, is there anything for you that you can answer tonight?
In terms of MPs' disciplinary processes, no, because that's not me to decide.
There was no disciplinary process for Steve Reid. That's why I'm asking you.
Well,
there was no disciplinary process for him, it would seem, because he deleted the tweet and, according to a spokesman, did not mean to cause offence. Whereas Diane Abbott, who apologised on the same day as her letter was published and withdrew her remarks immediately, was investigated for 8 months.
The point I'm making is that we have disciplinary processes, which obviously involves the decision of whether to investigate and how it's investigated and so on. And that's not something that MPs like myself have any involvement with or connection with, into. And that's right.
Well, let me put to you, could it be that because...
It's right that MPs like myself are not involved in that. And that gives the process, separation between people like myself and those who are conducting the investigation.
Is it because Steve Reid is essentially a political soulmate of Sir Keir Starmer, whereas Diane Abbott is clearly on the left of the party?
Look, I think it's really important that the process of investigation looks at all MPs and makes sure that if anyone has said or done anything which warrants investigation, that they are fully investigated, whoever they are.
Thank you very much for being with us tonight. Thank you,
Thank you.
James Murray. Right, we will be talking to the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, in a few minutes' time. But first, let's talk again to our panel, Kwasi Kwarteng and Dawn Bartlett, who are here with us. Let me ask you, Kwasi Kwarteng, about the two big announcements we've had from the Tories so far in this election campaign. Compulsory national service for 18-year-olds and the triple lock plus, as the Conservatives are calling it, protecting pensions from future Tory tax rises. Right. What do you think?
Well, I think they're targeted policies. The Nationals
targeted.
Well, that's clearly a policy. Clearly a policy about the triple lock plus for pensioners is targeted at pensioners. It's saying we're going to look after you as pensioners. That's a targeted policy, and I think it will go down well. National service is generally quite popular. Now you can argue about not with 18-year-olds, but generally across the country, people understand that there's an argument to be had about, or discussion rather, about trying to foster national cohesiveness. We're very divided as a society. We've got lots of different strands, and in order to pull them together, many people, and I, one of them, think national service is a good idea.
Is it that? Sorry, go on.
Do you really think that's the idea, to pull people together?
Of course it is.
I mean, there are
lots of.
No, it's ridiculous. There's lots of different schemes. There's the My End scheme, for instance, that was launched in Brent the other day by the Mayor of London. That gets all young people from different postcodes together. Sure. They do sports. They do education. That is, that is doable. Than like this national service scheme, which is going to cost billions of pounds, hasn't been costed. The army doesn't like it. I mean, it's a crazy scheme. It's just to grab headlines.
I don't think it's crazy.
Minister, though, he grabbed the headlines.
I don't think it's crazy. The fact that we're discussing it shows that it's been effective in terms of...
It shows that he did what he wanted to do.
The publicity and the engagement. And I think, ultimately, actually, there's a serious debate to be had about whether you want to have national service. And it's not some sort of outlandish thing. I mean, it happens in Sweden, it happens in Norway. I think the French have had it and now want to go back to it. So it's not something that's particularly
It is pretty
unusual.
different in Sweden, it has to be said. I want to talk to you about the economy, obviously. Former Chancellor, former Business Secretary, Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer announced today they had over 100 businesses endorsing them. They talk repeatedly about economic stability. Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, your successor, they say they've brought economic stability after the turbulence of yours and Liz Truss's mini budget. And I want to show you this graph, if I can. It's coming any second now, I'm told. Here it is. And you can see the exact moment when voters started to trust Labour over the Tories on the economy. And it is the time of your mini budget.
I mean, we know
Thanks for that.
Well, we know that it was a turbulent time. It was.
But does that keep you awake at night?
No, it doesn't keep me awake at night, because I think that we've had 20 months. That was 20 months ago, and I had thought we would be able to close the gap. I lost my job, rightly, perhaps wrongly. I mean, I paid the price.
Wrongly?
Well,
Do you think you should have kept your job?
Well, the idea when she sacked me was that she was going to preserve her political life, and she lasted a week. So that didn't work.
You told Liz.
I said that. That's exactly what I said. Exactly what would happen. But that's water under the bridge.
But the point is, the Tories have not regained their trust from voters.
But what I'm saying to you is that we've had 20 months where we could have rebuilt that, and for whatever reason that hasn't happened. But what you can't do is say, come in and say we're going to rebuild that trust. And then when there's a deficit, go back 20 months and say, well, we couldn't do anything. I'm not saying that the leaders are saying that, but we have had the opportunity. And I think, actually, a lot of that will close during the course of the campaign. I think...
it hasn't so far, even with 4% cut in national insurance.
Well, yeah, it's taken a while, but I think people will focus on the Labour offer during the campaign, and I think we'll have an opportunity.
I think at the end of the day, people want change. I mean, they've had enough of all of this chaos, and they're like, you know what? We want change.
Dawn, can I ask you, if I may, Labour supports the Conservatives' triple lock. They've made that clear on pensions, but not what the Tories call the triple lock plus. Do you know why?
Well, I haven't actually delved into the detail of the triple lock plus, but what I do know is that we have been trying to push the Tory party for a long time to protect pensions, to protect the triple lock, to not backtrack on the promises. You've got the waspy women that, you know, have been mistreated by this government, and there's so much to do. So it's not going to be an easy job if Labour's lucky enough to get into government, but it is a job that I think we are ready prepared to do. And you know, businesses, people, they like Rachel Reeves. They like what she has to say.
I should just say, interestingly, Rachel Reeves' team have sort of doing the calculator this weekend. They're saying since this campaign was launched, Rishi Sunak has spent £5 billion, and they're saying it hasn't been costed. And interestingly, 2 days in a row, how do they fund the National Service? How do they fund Triple Lock Plus? From cracking down on tax evasion and tax avoidance. I think we've heard that one before.
Because, well, no, that's true. Let's find out, because we are going to talk now to the Transport Secretary, Mark Harper, who is sitting over here by Regent Street. Thank you very much for talking to our viewers tonight, Mr. Harper. On your pensions announcement today, then, just to be clear, what you're doing is unfreezing the freeze that the Prime Minister brought in when he was Chancellor, correct?
We're saying that for pensioners, we'll uprate the personal allowance in line with the triple lock, so that under us, if you only have the basic state pension, you won't pay any tax on it. And as you've just discussed, Labour won't match that. So if Labour were to get in, there would effectively be a retirement tax on pensioners, because someone for the first time ever who only had the basic state pension under Labour would pay income tax.
Right. But you're unfreezing the freeze that Rishi Sunak brought in. And I'm just wondering if that's part of the reason why you want another 5 years, to correct the mistakes you've made in the past 14.
No, they weren't mistakes. Look, very simply, the thing
well, you've just reversed it.
Well, hang on. The thing that people keep forgetting when we have this discussion is that there was a global pandemic which cost us £400 billion to protect millions of jobs and thousands of businesses. And that has to be paid for. And that's meant we've had to make some very difficult decisions, not being able to cut taxes as fast as we would like to, and spending money. And actually, people realise that. I have businesses in my constituency that say to me today they only have a business because Rishi Sunak protected it when he was Chancellor. And they haven't forgotten, and they won't forget on the 4th of July.
Let me ask about how you say you would fund this. It is one of the biggest fiscal announcements in the election campaign when it comes to the Tories so far. You claim you can fund it by clamping down on tax avoidance. So how come there is still £2.5 billion of tax being avoided after 14 years of Tory government?
Well, we have said we can do that, and we know we can do that.
So
because
the question was, how come you've left this uncollected for 14 years?
First of all, the tax gap, the gap between what you could collect and what you collect, is actually smaller now than it ever has been, because consistently over the period we've been in government, we have been getting in that sort of money, £6 billion a year, every year, and we can use that. But you've suddenly
found, apparently, another £2.5 billion of tax that's been avoided.
We're going to carry on cracking down on evasion and avoidance to about the same level that we have done. That raises £6 billion, 2.4 billion of which we're going to use to protect pensioners. Okay. We think that's the right thing to do. We've protected it. We introduced and have kept the triple lock. Triple lock plus means that someone on a basic state pension doesn't pay any tax on it.
Thank you. Newsnight viewers definitely understand that. And when were you told about this pensions triple lock plus?
Well, we were briefed on it ahead of the public announcement.
When was that?
So, well, we briefed by the Work and Pension Secretary ahead of the public announcement.
When, last night, this morning, yesterday?
No, ahead of the public announcement. I'm not going to go into the details.
But you were told about it before?
Yes, I was. Yeah.
And when were you told about the compulsory national service?
So I was briefed about that in advance as well, as you would expect as a member of the Cabinet.
OK. I'm going to ask you if... I've got a clip that I want to play you from ITV. Let's have a look at it. This is Rishi Sunak talking to Loose Women.
I think your heart's in the right place, but why do you hate pensioners? Why do you hate pensioners?
So is that why he's brought in this triple lock plus, so people like Janet Street-Porter and others can't say that to him?
Well, I think that's frankly a ridiculous comment for her to say. We have, since we've been in government, we have introduced the triple lock. We've made sure that pensioners in this country have had a consistent rise in income. And this, I think, actually goes very nicely with what we've been doing for people of working age, which is we've cut national insurance contributions. So we're cutting taxes on working people. So someone on average income's had a £900 tax cut. And this makes sure we protect pensioners. It's properly costed, properly funded. And I think it's a very good policy. And I think it'll be very popular.
To paraphrase Janet Street-Porter, I could ask you, why do you hate young people?
Well, we don't. I don't know why you would say that. We've just cut.
Let me tell you why I'm asking. Let me tell you why I'm asking.
All right, and then I'll tell you why that's not true.
Compared to what you've done for pensioners, look at what you've done for young people. You're going to force them to do national service. You've tripled their tuition fees. You froze the threshold at which they have to start paying back their student loan. You've extended the student loan repayment term from 30 to 40 years, meaning many graduates will be paying off the debt in their 60s. You invested only a third of what was recommended by the catch-up czar to help kids catch up after the pandemic. Rents rose nearly 9% in the last year, and houses are at their most expensive since 1876. That's why I ask, have the Tories got a problem with young people?
No, not at all. That's why, for example, we've cut national insurance contributions for working people. That applies to everyone who works for a living. We've increased the national living wage to a record level to make sure those on the lowest incomes have had significant rises. And your point actually about tuition fees, I strongly believe in tuition fees for this reason. Well, if you look at the parts of the UK where they don't exist, in Scotland, that means what you do is you limit opportunities by limiting the number of people that can go to university. If you come from a poor background in Scotland, you're less likely to have the chance of going to university than someone from the same background in England. I'm the first person...
Well, even though it's free?
Yes, because what they do in Scotland is they limit the number of people that get those opportunities. So if you come from a background like mine, if you get from a background like mine, working class background, you've got less chance of having that opportunity in Scotland than you do in England.
I would have to
That's why I'm a Conservative, because we believe in opportunities for everybody.
Thank you very much for talking to our audience.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Mark Harper, who is the Transport Secretary, as you know. Right, let's have a quick look at some of tomorrow's newspapers. So we've got the Daily Telegraph. Sunak. I'm talking to Johnson about the election. Maybe I'll mention that to Kwasi Kwarteng in just a moment. The Times. Sunak plans university cuts to boost apprentices. Should have put that to Mark Harper. Daily Mail. Tory vow to ban rip-off university degrees by changing the law. Financial Times. Ofwat sketches out recovery regime to avoid nationalising water groups. The I think we have. Triple lock plus to save retirees 28p a week on the state pension. And then front page of The Guardian, Israeli spy chief threatened ICC official over war crimes inquiry. Right, Sir Ed Davey, leader of the Lib Dems, got on a paddleboard today, and guess what happened?
I'm enjoying this, honestly.
Did it look a little bit staged? I wonder. Sir Ed Davey has been in touch with a message for you.
I hear people wonder whether I fell in deliberately at the Windham Electric. I fell in 5 times. They were not all intentional, but it was a serious message about the fact that sewage is a big problem, not just in the Lake District, but in lakes and rivers and beaches across our country. And the issue about sewage be on the ballot paper on July the 4th. I know you're revamping Newsnight. I hope it goes really well. The best of luck, and I'm looking forward to being on your programme.
So, is that going to happen? People will fall off paddleboards in election
I hope
campaigns.
you didn't swallow anything in there. So there's a lot of sewage in our waterways. 14 years of a Tory government. That's,
it looked pretty staged to me. And I have to say that I saw one person say that that's the biggest splash they're going to make in the campaign. Which
all publicity is good publicity.
Ed Davey is the only politician who can get away with this because he embraces his centrist dad. Whenever they have by-election council successes, they do all these stunts, and it's because he says, "I'm happy."
Matt Hancock did all of that in the jungle.
He did all and lost the whip. But the point is that even Ed Davey would say he's not a candidate to be prime minister. He's a candidate.
Well, unlike last time, unlike Joe Swinson.
That's right. Unlike Joe Swinson, he's a candidate to, excuse the pun, make waves and trouble for the other parties, but he can get away with that.
He gets away with that.
Yeah, that's true.
But in terms of his team around him going, OK, let's put you on a paddleboard, are they thinking it wouldn't really be a disaster if you fell off?
Yeah, of course
they loved it. I mean, they were, he's got
We're talking about it. If he'd stayed on, we wouldn't be talking about this.
He dived, though, didn't he? I mean, he didn't fall. He dived forward, dived to the side.
I'm not sure about that.
Those are typical.
I don't think he's got an amazing... it takes one to know one. I don't think he's got a great sense of balance, to be honest.
Okay.
How do you know that?
Just looking. He's
worst stunt you've ever pulled in order to win an election?
Not the paddleboard thing. I'm trying to think.
Interesting question.
Yes, I can think of one or two things.
Worst stunt that was pulled on you, being sacked on Twitter?
That was not cool. Okay. I saw that. Yeah, so that was... Well, I knew that it was the truth.
I've got a question for you, though.
Yeah, sure.
So, did you put in a letter of no confidence in Rishi?
No, never did that. Never did that for any leader.
Really?
I've never put in a no confidence
letter. Is the reason why he called the general election because the letters were going in?
No,
and he thought, right, I'll get back at everybody?
I think he thought this was as good a time as any. The worst thing you can do when you're sort of in the bunker is give the impression that you're just clinging on to dear life. And he didn't want to do that. And he felt that, in terms of the inflation figure, he was doing what he wanted to do, what he'd set out.
Okay.
And that was a good reason for him to call the election.
Thank you. Dawn Butler, Kwasi Kwarteng. Thank you very much, Nick. As always, see you tomorrow. That's it from us. Election Newsnight is with you each weeknight from 10:30 with live interviews and insight and loads of analysis. Plus, we're live, so you never quite know what's going to happen. See you tomorrow.